Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Pathways to Knowledge. It's going to be a good one this week. It's going to be very controversial. It's going to get a lot of people excited, going to make maybe a few even angry, but who knows? So Ellen is here, so I'm hoping that we can split the blame for it. That's so maybe she gets some of the bad emails for a change, but no one knows her emails, so that's not too probable. So Ellen, hello, how are you?
Good. Hello, everyone. How's everyone's week been going?
It's for those of you that don't know, Elena lives very close to where the blast went off yesterday over at Kennedy when the rocket blew up. So she got to see some excitement last night. It was we missed it here in Florida because we were inside, but she was looking at it and. Almost, if it would have been me, I would have lost some hair over it. So,
if I wasn't in my jammies, I would have gotten in the car and driven right there to it.
No, it was something. Take time to look at the videos on TV. We had a big one here last night. So anyway, why don't we get started? Go.
Yep, let's go ahead. So there are many varying opinions of the origin and historical accuracy of the Gospels of the Bible. There is now doubt that the Bible creates the best foundation for the teachings of the Christian faith. There are many who believe that every word of the Gospels are the actual words of God, and many believe that the writings have been altered by man through the years to increase the power of organized religions. Tonight we will challenge, we'll challenge them, but we'll channel the spirits of Matthew, whose name is credited with the first book of the New Testament, and Constantine the Great, the first Christian Roman emperor who did foundational work in organizing the books of the Bible during his reign. Before any writings were recorded, the teachings and the accounts of the life of Jesus were passed down by the word of mouth from 30 AD to approximately 70 AD. The Gospel of Mark is considered the first written gospel, and it is written between the years 65 and 70 AD, which is about 30 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. So let's begin with channeling the spirit of Matthew. Matthew, thank you for coming. Could you begin by telling us what it was like to know Jesus in life?
Hello, and thank you so much for having me back again. I always enjoy being able to speak of God, of Jesus. I was very blessed to know him in life, and I was very close to him as he delivered his messages. Our Lord was incredible. He never showed anger. He always showed love. All he wanted was what was best for us. He would tell us that we all live a good life and there would be a time that we would join him in heaven. He did miracles. We knew he was special, but we never totally understood how very special he was. All through his life, we followed and we listened to his words. He spoke very simply. He spoke to the common people. Keep in mind in those days that most of the people to whom he spoke were members of the Jewish faith. They believed in the ancient Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament, and they believed that the Messiah was coming. Unfortunately, they never accepted him as the Messiah, but he did what he wanted to do. And in the end, he created the greatest miracle of the resurrection. So we were with him. We were with him through his ministries. Many of us knew him for some time before he began the ministries. He was just a wonderful, wonderful individual. I do think that you picked a good subject for tonight. I have some answers that may be a little different than what others think, but it's going to be very interesting. And many people are not going to believe that you're actually speaking to the individual, the soul referred to as St. Matthew. But I can assure you that that is whose words you are hearing. So let's see how the answers go. We'll see how it works out.
So did any of the disciples or followers record any of his words or actions as he spoke them?
Many of the disciples actually couldn't write, so it would have been impossible for them to do it. I was a tax collector, so I had some abilities of writing numbers and so forth. But as a general rule, there were no notes taken when our Lord spoke. He would be walking along and we would be with him, and he would see someone that caught his eye. Perhaps he would do a miracle because he saw an individual that was sick. He had many opportunities. Even when he spoke to groups, the groups were relatively small. Keep in mind, there were no loudspeakers, there were no stadiums. He would see maybe 30, 40 people at most at a time. And the people to whom he was speaking had no idea really who he was. He was trying to convince them that he was special, that he was representing the one God, that he was doing things that would bring people around to believing in God. But it was not what most people conceive of. He was not speaking to thousands and thousands of people. The individuals that he was speaking to were poor. They were carpenters, they were farmers, they were simply trying to raise their families. There were no public schools in those days. Only the rich were the ones that basically had education. So he had to speak simply. And the people to whom he was speaking, they didn't have the ability to write and to record what he was saying. Keep in mind that you didn't have tablets of paper to write on. It was very expensive to come up with the papyrus, what people would write. The scrolls. In those days, they were not books. The printing press wasn't delivered for over 1,000 years after Jesus spoke. Everything was handwritten. Basically, the writings took place in Greek because that was the prominent language of the time. So there were multiple translations. People might have written, if they took notes, they might have written in a language that was not comprehended by most people. So there are many reasons why the words of our Lord were not recorded. Most of the messages and the words came from what we remembered that he said. There were times that we would go back and perhaps small notes would be taken, but there was never a time that anyone sat down and tried word for word to say what our Lord spoke.
Did Jesus ever speak in parables or complicated messages?
He spoke very simply because he was speaking to the uneducated. The people to whom he was speaking had Jewish backgrounds. Many of them were familiar with the Jewish teachings of the time. He was very, very careful not to speak in complicated ways that people wouldn't understand him. Had he done so, they would have walked away from him. Keep in mind, in those days, it was very difficult to feed your families. When somebody was listening to another, they were not working in the fields. They were not doing the carpentry work they needed to support their families. So time was at a premium for all the individuals that were listening to it. So when our Lord spoke to these people, he made every word count. He spoke simply. He told them about living a good life, showing love, not showing violence. All the things that he speaks about when he brings messages to you today, when Barry does the weekly message. But he spoke simply, and that was critical. Keep in mind, his messages were not designed for the wealthy. He knew that the individuals had to carry on after he was gone. And he chose individuals that were intelligent, but they basically lacked the education to write the words. That is why it took so many years after his passing as stories were told and retold. Some of the stories obviously changed with each telling. So it is impossible that every word that is recorded in the Gospels would be the actual words that our Lord spoke. Even as I stand here and I was with him, I cannot tell you the actual words that he spoke. I wrote notes, I told others, I worked with the other disciples. But there was no true recording of what Jesus spoke to the masses.
What do you remember most about his words?
The simplicity, the love. When he spoke, you could feel the love, the energy. He would talk to people and they would fall in love with him for his words. When you looked into his eyes, you knew that this was someone special. Our Lord had blue eyes, and that was very unusual for the area. Palestinians usually had dark eyes. The Jewish people would have dark eyes. But he would speak, and each person in that crowd would think that he was speaking directly to him. He would say things that would register with the individuals. The people were looking to believe. There were many things about the Jewish faith, the stories of the old Gospels, that were hard to believe. Most of the people did not have familiarity with what you refer to as the Old Testament. They would hear what the priests would tell them, and the priests were not, shall we say, totally devoted to the welfare of the people at that time either. So our Lord spoke directly to those that listened to him, and they responded. And because they responded, his words were carried on for thousands of years.
Did you write any of the Gospel of Matthew?
No. I told people the stories that I remembered of our Lord. I wrote notes. As time went on, I tried to record some things that had taken place that I remembered. I wanted to have something that others could read of our Lord. But what was written in the gospel was a combination. It was things that were taken from the writings of Mark, from others, from things that I did. It was basically a compilation of words that agreed with the memory that I had of our Lord.
So then who actually wrote your gospel?
Others that were around me. Paul was very well educated. So Paul, even though he was not one of us that knew our Lord, he recorded not only what he saw after the resurrection, but much of what we told him our Lord had spoken of. Paul was probably the most educated of our group, and he did a lot of writings that were incorporated by others who came later. There were individuals that wrote the Gospels that had never met any of us who truly knew our Lord, because there were so many generations that expired between. Keep in mind that many of the disciples were martyred, that we were persecuted by the Romans, that we had to work our messages in the background. Many traveled to foreign countries where they formed religious groups. And in those groups, individuals would come forward and record the lessons that they were being taught. So it was a compilation of many different writings that wound up as being part of what you refer to as the Gospel of Matthew.
How accurate do you consider the gospel written in your name?
Fairly accurate. There are many exaggerations in there. The events of the birth, obviously none of us were present at the events of the birth. So that was all what we were told by Mary, by Joseph, and by our Lord himself. I would say that what is recorded would be maybe 70 to 80% accurate in my gospel. But there are other gospels, such as Revelations, where basically nothing is accurate. So mine reflects fairly well my memory of the events of what I went through with our Lord.
How familiar were you with the Old Testament prophecies and the Jewish Messiah?
I was not overly familiar with it. I had been fairly educated in the Jewish faith, but I was more interested in trying to advance myself with the Jewish priest. I studied what I needed to know to be a tax collector because I was trying to gain status in the Jewish faith and with the government, the priests that had the power of the time. I had heard the words. I cannot say that I've ever physically saw ancient writings. I was listening to what the priests would tell us and from what they had been taught. But I knew of the ancient prophecies. I did not fully understand that our Lord was the Messiah either. Keep in mind that there was much negativity towards him because he was speaking words that really differed towards foundational parts of the Jewish faith. So they were not, shall we say, overwhelmed by the words that our Lord was speaking. So there was a lot of negativity towards him. So I never really put it together that he truly was the Messiah until I actually went back to heaven.
The Gospel of Mark focuses heavily on the actions of Jesus and his suffering. How accurate do you think the Gospel of Mark is?
I think that there are many errors in the Gospel of Mark. Now, keep in mind that none of us attended the crucifixion because we feared the Romans would kill us if we went to the crucifixion. So everything that is written about the death of Jesus is based on what the two Marys told us and what other individuals, generally females, that observed the crucifixion. The resurrection, we were not present when the empty tomb was discovered. So once again, we were told what took place in these events. Through the years, messages changed. There is much that is exaggerated concerning the death of our Lord. The dead did not rise from the grave. That never took place. The earthquakes did not take place. There was a minor earthquake while our Lord was resurrecting because of the terrific energy that went with the resurrection. But at the time that he died on the cross, he died very peacefully. And there were no great natural events that took place. He was taken down from the cross and he was put into the tomb. It was a very simple act for the time. And it was not accompanied by all of these things, the exaggerations that are often referred to. So there are things that were truly exaggerated in the description of the death of our Lord that appear in those Gospels.
Does your gospel then rely heavily on the Gospel of Mark?
In certain areas, the individuals that wrote what the gospel that is attributed to me did try to use information that was written in what you call the Gospel of Mark. There are also writings that existed that were used for information that are not existing today nor referred to properly. So there were multiple notes that were taken about different situations. And what you see is a synopsis. It is, shall we say, they took everything that was in agreement or that seemed to be in agreement. Just because different writings said different things, those writings could have been based upon events that were misinterpreted. So it was a compilation of writings that occurred 2 generations after the death of our Lord.
Mark is said to have been a companion of Peter. If you were an eyewitness to the ministries of Jesus, why would you have relied so heavily on the writings of others?
Because it was not myself that did the writings. It was an individual who did not know. So he relied on the writings of Mark. My notes were not as complete as what was compiled in that gospel in the later years. So what I wrote was based on my memories, but it is not necessarily my works that appear in my gospel, if that makes sense.
So where are your notes?
Some of my notes were destroyed, and some of them were ignored because they didn't agree with what were written in the other gospels or collections of scrolls.
What do you consider the most accurate gospel of the New Testament?
I would say that the writings of Paul in Corinthians would be the most accurate. Paul had firsthand information by speaking to all of us. So he knew that what basically those who lived with our Lord understood. So his writings are very accurate.
How accurate do you consider the Old Testament?
Not accurate at all, because so many years elapsed in the writings or the events that supposedly took place in the Old Testament. There are many events that never took place that are in positions of importance in the Old Testament. The idea of Noah and the whale, for instance, that is an exaggeration that never took place. There are other events. Adam and Eve, that is not how God created man and woman. So there are many things in the Old Testament that have been manipulated. And that makes sense because where the New Testament has been around for over 2,000 years, the Old Testament was created in more primitive times where writings were more rare and stories would have been carried on for many generations and multiple changes and exaggerations. So man had more years to manipulate the Old Testament. Even though the Jewish faith created the books and established them, they were not beyond manipulating words as well for their own benefit.
In the early centuries of Christianity, there were many other gospels circulating, such as the Gospels of Thomas, Peter, and Mary. Were any of those gospels more accurate to the life and teachings of Jesus than the ones included in the Bible?
In certain ways, there were some that were more accurate, and in certain ways, there were some that weren't. The Gospel of Thomas has some very accurate writings in it. Thomas was very close to Jesus, and he wrote things that future generations did not accept. In many ways, Thomas completely understood Jesus and what was taking place. Yes, he had great doubts about the resurrection, but Thomas was very close to Jesus. Peter was very close to Jesus. Peter did some writings, but not many. Thomas was actually fairly literate and wrote quite a few notes concerning our Lord. And in general, what Thomas wrote was quite accurate. But because it differed in many ways from the Gospels that agreed with each other, decisions were made not to use anything that would create disturbances among the early Christians who were reading the compilation of the works.
Your gospel is the only one to mention the unique events surrounding the resurrection. What were your specific sources for these events, and why did other writers omit them?
I was close to Mary Magdalene, and she saw our Lord. She was at the tomb. She knew most of the events. Keep in mind, nobody truly understood what had taken place. All they knew that our Lord had reappeared after he had clearly died on the cross. There was no concept of the energies. We knew it was a miracle of God, but that's basically all we knew about it. And I had to rely on the writings of the two Marys and of the other people who had witnessed what had taken place. But nobody witnessed the act of the resurrection. That was all supposition. Nobody really knew what had taken place. Many of us had seen our Lord reappear. Many, such as Paul, had seen him, but everyone reacted differently to what they were seeing, because at that time, nothing was clearly defined about what was taking place. So there was great uncertainty. Everyone knew that they had seen our Lord after he had been killed on the cross, but nobody really understood the immense miracle that had taken place. Many had seen our Lord bring Lazarus from the grave, but he had not been dead for a long period, and our Lord brought him back. We all thought it was something similar. That was the only thing we could compare it to. But once time went on and individuals truly understood what had taken place, and many had seen him after the resurrection, that is when we started to try to understand what truly had happened.
Would you tell our listeners about the accuracy of the writing of all the Gospels?
There are different extremes in the Gospels. The first three, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, have many similarities in them. Many of the similarities are fairly accurate. There are exaggerations in all of the Gospels. Revelations should not have been included because there is very little truth in Revelations. The works of Paul are generally taken as he wrote them. So there's a lot of accuracy there, although through the years, some of the translations, etc., have taken place. The Bible is the greatest example written in one place of the life of Jesus, and the Old Testament is an example of what people think went before. Even though the New Testament has many exaggerations and problems in some of the ideas and concepts that are stated in it, it still represents the best foundational document to learn about the life of Jesus. Yes, there are events that are exaggerated. Yes, there are events that perhaps never even took place. But our Lord did more things than are recorded in the New Testament. He did more miracles than are recorded. He spoke to many more people than are recorded. So I guess the best way might be to describe that the New Testament is a minimal description of what our Lord truly accomplished and did. He did so much more that is not even written. I witnessed things in his life that are not recorded in the Bible. We never truly understood the great importance of the life of our Lord. We knew him as a human individual. We did not know him as God incarnate. Once that information became knowledge through the years, the Gospels that were written do not reflect truly that information. So it is still an incredibly important document and should be studied. But you must look at it with common sense and understand the historical context of what really took place. Once you do that and understand where possibly an event has been exaggerated, or maybe the true terms or terminologies have been changed, that becomes not important. What is important is the truth of the life of Jesus. And with modern techniques, he is telling you the truth of his life. You can understand now. He had Barry write a book about the missing years. The 30 years were before his ministries. So all the information is now available. But you must understand that until he has brought this information forward, the entire truth has not been available.
Do you have a parting message for our listeners?
Yes. I want to thank all of you that have devoted hours and times to studying the gospel. For thousands of years, that has been the only true source of information. Sadly, through those years, man has been able to manipulate it for their own free will, their own power. The church, for many years, was more interested in its own survival and power than it was in bringing the truth. Today, you have the ability to sort through what is true. Use your common sense. Know that our Lord truly existed. Know that heaven truly exists. Know that if you live a good life, you will advance in the realms of heaven. Use your free will to do the best you can. Serve the common sense words that you hear. Do not dwell on things that you know are possibly inaccurate. Dwell on the good, and your lives will be so much better for it. So thank you so much. I truly appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you again for coming. We're going to switch our attention now to Constantine the Great, who was a Roman emperor from 306 AD to 337 AD. He was the first Roman emperor to create Christianity, and he played a pivotal role in ending Christian persecution. Welcome, Emperor. What was the state of Christianity when you became emperor in 306 AD?
It was in a state of turmoil. There were many people that believed very strongly in Jesus, but did not believe in what he was. Was he God incarnate? Was he the Son of God? What were his powers? When I became emperor, no one even knew the date for Easter. Keep in mind that 300 years had elapsed, basically, since the crucifixion of Jesus. There were different stories told. Many people had read different types of gospels. Through the years, the Christian faith had attempted to determine which documents or gospels would be used in the different religions. Christianity was in turmoil. The Romans had attempted to destroy all of the documents of the Christian faith because they were trying to destroy this. Several years before I took over, there had been a decree to destroy all the written documentation. So it was very difficult to know what had been destroyed, what had been saved, what was accurate, what was not accurate. Throughout the 300 years before I came into existence, the church had tried to sort out and use documents that were very similar. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. They're basically very, very similar. So it was something that Christians could basically agree upon, those documents. Revelations, there was no agreement, and I had great doubts about Revelations. So there were documents that were agreed upon, and there were documents that weren't. The Gnostic Gospels, they were basically rejected, even though there is some truth in those Gnostic Gospels. So Christianity was in turmoil. Emperors before me had tried to kill those that were practicing the faith. Generally, it was practiced in secrecy. Generally, groups throughout the empire could not get together and compare notes. So you may have had someone in the extremes of the empire teaching Christianity from one set of gospels and teaching, and in other areas of the empire, they were using a different set of gospels. So Christianity was in a state of turmoil. Different sects of Christianity were actually rioting against each other and showing violence. I knew that if we did not compile and strengthen the Christian faith, that there would be a time that it would overthrow the empire. And I did not truly want that to happen. I did believe the writings that I had the privilege to see concerning the life of Jesus. And I did truly become the first emperor that supported Christianity and did my best to have the faith advance. So it was a very difficult time, to say the least.
You were the first Roman emperor to fund the mass printing of the Bible. How were the Gospels selected that were included in the Bible?
A lot were selected by tradition. Many of the Gospels had been used through the hundreds of years by the different bishops or leaders of the faith. There had been leaders of the faith that had selected different types of books. So there was a basic outline. There were many more Gospels that were available than were actually selected. While I did not decree exactly what was to be included, I tried to leave that to the bishops that we called together in 325 AD at Nicaea. That was not the topic of discussion, the main topic. The main topic, when the bishops were drawn together, we had to solve the problem of the date of Easter because it was conflicting with Jewish Passover. No one could say with any definite terms the exact date, or really even the month that Jesus was crucified. So we determined that. We came up with what you've referred to as the Nicene Creed, which defined Christianity, a single structure of belief. But I did have some influence, obviously, before the Gospels were printed under my name. Keep in mind that there were only 50 copies of the first Bible that was ever compiled with the Old and New Testament together. So it was a major work, but I had to rely on the leaders of the church so that they would support the Gospels that were included in the Bible.
So is any one of those original 50 still in existence?
there are several where portions are in existence.
You know what I'm going to ask next? Where are they?
The Catholic Church has them, and there are some portions that are in existence that no one is aware of.
Do we have any way of discovering them?
No.
Okay. So what exact role then did you play in selecting the Gospels?
I influenced, but would not make the final choice. I was trying to build unity in the Christian church at the time. I would speak with the different bishops, and I would say, well, this I don't think works well, but I would never just say to them, this is what I want. So I influenced, but I did not make direct decisions by using my powers. I wanted the leaders of the church to appear and to themselves think that they made the final decisions. I considered myself a pretty good politician at the time. So there was no way that I did not have final decisions in what was going to be in what I refer to as my Bible. But it was based on tradition. It was based on the decisions that the bishops throughout the empire that had taught the different words. We were looking for continuity. We were looking for unity. And that is what I think I accomplished by printing the first book.
Were there any Gospels that you personally had removed from the Bible?
I had tried to lead them from putting in Revelations. And I think that it was basically snuck in against my opinion. Revelations does not have any factual information in it. It is a book of fear. I tried to accept the concept, and I did accept the concept that Jesus spoke of love. My mother was very important in the Christian movement of the time, and she helped me in many ways with what we did. I felt that it was a time that there was a single document, what you refer to as a Bible, that would bring together all the different factions of Christianity.
Speaking of your mother, there is a theory that she actually has a piece or had a piece of the cross that Christ was crucified. Is that true, or is that just another?
Keep in mind that the crosses, at the time, nobody really understood how important Jesus was. These crosses were reused until they disintegrated. So she was told it was a piece of the cross, but it wasn't.
So you mentioned the Council of Nicaea. What else took place at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD?
It was the first time that we ever brought together the bishops from throughout the empire. It was a very difficult time. There were many different groups of Christianity. There were Gnostics yet. We had done a lot to try to remove the Gnostic teachings. We wanted to resolve the problem with Easter and Passover. That was very important. We wanted to determine a creed or a unified statement of who Jesus was. And the wording of what you refer to as the Nicene Creed is still a doctrine that is preached today. So in that respect, I think we were very, very successful. But when the conference was over, there was still plenty of dissension to go around. We tried to do the best we could to bring unity to the church. But keep in mind, this is the first time that the leaders did not have to fear persecution by the Roman Empire itself. So once we gave them the freedoms to speak, we tried to give them the direction and the creed with the information they were to speak. So in essence, I think that was very, very successful.
So what was your role in the Council of Nicaea?
I think you could refer to me as a referee in modern terms. I tried simply to get the individuals with all these differences to cooperate and to come up with decisions. I knew that I was going to, one of the goals that I wanted was to prepare a complete book of Gospels. So there was a lot of discussion about the books that would be included. As I said, many of them had been used for years, but I wanted the church leaders to make the decision. I would lead them in the direction to where I wanted them to go. Many would still disagree, but I was able to bring enough of them into agreement that we came up with a basic foundation of the Gospels that I was to put into those first 50 copies.
You mentioned that you didn't think that Revelations was accurate. What is your real opinion of Revelations, and why do you think it was snuck into the final version of the Bible?
There were people that truly did not understand the teachings of Jesus. They had read this and they saw that the element of fear could be introduced through Revelation. I think even though it was still in the beginning time of the church, the concept of fear was accepted as a tool of control. And I think that some of the leaders realized that this could be used as a tool to help control the members of the faith. So I think that was probably the main reason it was included.
Do we know who the author of Revelations is?
Yes. And it was not the disciple John.
So who was it?
It was a man named John.
But not the disciple John.
No, definitely not.
What is your opinion now that you're in heaven of the accuracy of the Bible?
I think that overall is, as Matthew said, the best document to represent Christianity as a whole. I truly understand the areas where there's discrepancies. I understand the fact that no one truly accurately recorded the words of our Lord, but it represents the best document. You must look at it with common sense and accept it for what it is. It is not the be all and the end all. It is a document that was put together by man. It is not a document that was written by God.
Well, now that you're in heaven, what changes would you make to the gospel selected for the Bible?
I would remove Revelations. That would be my first step. And I would go in and I would try to take out many of the exaggerations that turn people away from religion. For instance, many people look at Jonah and the whale and they say, this could never take place. How can I be basing my faith on a document that would include something that is so stupid? I would try to go in and redefine some of the instances that have been obviously added by man. I would go in and I would change anything where you create the fear of God. Our Lord only spake of loving God. I would take out anything that we refer to a place of hell. I would try to redefine things so that the writings would appeal to the common person, that would make sense. As long as you would take out the offending portions. The Bible is a miraculous document, and I would try to have people understand that fact.
Why weren't more gospels included?
Because the ones that were included generally agreed with one another, and we were talking unity for the Christians. Another reason is that I felt that the document had to not be overly long. People in those days were illiterate, and they had to rely on individuals that could read the Bible. So if you would have put 200 chapters in, it would have been too complicated for people to understand that the teachings were to be as simple as possible. Individuals had to retain what they were told about the Gospels. If you would have complicated it by adding multiple different teachings, you would have become impossible for the people of the time to have maintained interest in the book.
If you could choose the most accurate gospel among those included and those not included, what would it be?
I would agree with the writings of Paul.
Any others?
Portions of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are accurate, but there are portions that have been exaggerated. But in general, the letters of Paul and some of the letters that are attributed to him were written by others. But the ones that were actually written by Paul truly are based on words of individuals that knew Jesus in person. And Paul was an eyewitness to the resurrection. So his words are probably as accurate as anything that has ever been written.
What will you tell those that believe that every word of the Bible is accurate?
I would tell them that it's impossible. In the beginning, as Jesus began his ministries, no one even knew how special or who he was. There were not people writing his words down. Everything came from memory. The free will, humans had free will in those days as they do today. And individuals used their free will to record what they felt was personally important at the time. An individual listening to what Jesus said may have totally missed the point. Our Lord spoke simply. He spoke to the point, and he tried to bring his message of love to everyone. His messages are so simple that the church leaders felt they had to be complicated so that the individuals hearing the messages had to rely on the leaders of the church for interpretation. A leader of the church does not want to believe that an individual can obtain heaven on their own. The leaders of the church wanted to bring in as many people to the church and rely upon it so that they would bring financial benefits to the religions and would bring power to the religions, and that you would rely on the church leaders for interpretation. If the Gospels were simplified, the reliance upon organized religion for each individual would have been diminished.
Sounds like that's where we should have gone, but that's my opinion.
Well, 2,000 years of church leadership disagreed with you.
Keep it simple, always. Do you have a final message for us?
Yes. In many ways, I tried my best to bring Christianity to the forefront and to protect it. In many ways, I probably did things that were not in true alignment with the teachings of our Lord. But I tried to do my best, and I think that I succeeded. The fact that I produced the first written book that contained Old and New Testament Gospels was very important. I did what I needed to do at the time. I think I brought some unity to the Christian church, and I gave it some guidance. So I was very blessed to have been sent back and to have given the power to do so at the time. I want all of you that are listening to understand that the Bible represents the life of Jesus and those who went before him. Man has altered much of what is in there, but the basic foundation and concepts are the best guide that you can have in your life. So just go forward. Use your common sense when you read the difficult passages. Listen and just truly understand the simplicity of the message that Jesus truly spoke. So I want to thank you for allowing me to return once more. Thank you so much. And I hope that what we've said today is some service to you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, both of you. We've channeled both of them before, and they're great souls. So I must admit I knew a little bit of where we were headed with this, but I wanted to try to bring a little different look at it. We call this show Pathways to Knowledge, and truly knowing our Lord is one of the greatest pathways that you can find. So Eleanor, don't know what we're going to do again next week, but they'll put something in my head and away we go.
Yep.
All right. So folks, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back again next week. Goodbye. Tell others about us. Try to reach as many as you can. It's very important. Goodbye.